So joining me now is an old friend, a one-time neighbor whose actually daughter one time babysat my kids. But we sort of professionally have been working around each other, kind of working together, even though we never worked at the same organization at the same time. It's Ron Fournier, who has done a lot of things in the world of journalism and is now his own entrepreneur. He's a native of Michigan and comes these days, is based in Michigan after a stint in Washington, D.C. And before that, what sort of got him into the world of political reporting, arguably, was being the bureau chief in Little Rock when a governor of Arkansas suddenly became a national figure. Ron, it's good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, buddy. I hear you were here in Detroit the other day.
I was. Local news in crisis. And look, we've got a lot of thoughts on media, but sort of the primary conversation I want to have with you is all things Michigan. I was just talking with Dave Weigel, as listeners will know, and I said, when you look at all the storylines of where America's headed, right? Mm-hmm. You've got whether it's, is there room for an independent? You've got the three-way governor's race with what's going on there. What's going on inside the Democratic Party, outsider, insider, the Senate primary there between Stevens and McMorrow definitely has that insider-outsider feel. Throw in the other candidacy and it's the progressives versus, it's both a generation, right? It's a generational argument. It's an ideological argument. Whatever you could just plant yourself in Michigan in 2026 and start writing about what's going to happen in 2028 all over the place, right? Appetite for independence. Where is the direction of the Democratic Party? And can the Republicans ever win without Trump? Right. The fact is, the only Republican that can win statewide in Michigan has the last name of Trump. Right. If you I think as Weigel, it's been since 2014 that a Republican not named Trump has been able to win anything.
And then we have a governor who's on the national agenda, and who's got a scandal hanging over her head. So yeah.
So let's start with a simple way of looking at this, and this is sort of your sweet spot. And you grew up in this state, you live in this state now. Your family, I mean, your DNA is Michigan. What makes it these days probably our best microcosm? And that stuff changes, right? We've been there when Florida was the microcosm. We've been there when Ohio was the microcosm. And right now it feels like it's Michigan. Why?
Well, I think Michigan has always been a great bellwether. If you believe that politics is is the tail that's not being wagged by the dog. If you believe that to understand how politics is changing, you have to understand how people are changing. So Michigan has been a place for the last generation or two where all these cross currents of change, economic change, demographic change, technological change, globalization, are making life so difficult for Michiganders, and their institutions have been letting them down by the boatload for the last generation or two, and that has created a very disruptive, angry, frustrated electorate that swings back and forth, so desperate for change, they'll do desperate things like voting for Donald Trump. So it's not always been as much of as a Florida every cycle. But I tell you, it helped me be a fairly good political reporter, even when I was living in Washington, coming back here 6 or 7 or 8 times a cycle, talking to folks in northern Michigan in 2014 when I first wrote that Donald Trump could become president. It was because of the makeup of the people of the state that they're very reflective of how people are being let down by their politics, and they're looking for something big and different.
One of the hallmarks of your career, I feel like, at least since I've gotten to know you, is you've always been trying to figure out what you're missing, right? And you're missing something like this.
Always.
The left-right paradigm of political coverage in Washington, you can't avoid as much as, when you're sitting as the AP Washington correspondent or the AP bureau chief, or you're moderator of Meet the Press, at the end of the day, those are the two that, where I always say Washington's a company town, and the same way Detroit's a company town, right? Washington's 100%. A company town, and it's the D's and the R's. And yet you and I have both been there's this other entity out there. There's the disaffected. They're the ones that decide who temporarily has power. I'm going to bring up a book. I believe it was a book, Applebee's America, right?
Yes,
You were
sir.
trying
Yep.
to, that goes back probably now 20 years or pretty close to 20 years.
Yeah.
But in
20 years.
some ways, I bring it up because I watch what Mike Duggan is doing in the governor's race. And it is like, can you have a conversation with voters without the overhang of the baggage of the two parties? And you've constantly been looking to have that conversation. Mike Duggan's trying to have that conversation. And yet I feel like it's harder than ever to have a conversation with voters without the overhang of the two major parties.
It is, because so many voters have used the new technology to self-isolate themselves in their intellectual bubbles and their biases. But Duggan is onto something here. There's not very many political operatives in the state who would agree with me, but right now, Chuck, I'm telling you, Mike Duggan is the front runner in this race. First of all, he's been running for governor for 15 years. He's been going around the state with this incredible PowerPoint presentation that he puts together every year, first for that big Mackinac, that conference in Mackinac that I know you go to, where he touts Detroit's revitalization. Well, he's been delivering that in rural towns all over the state for 10 years. He's really tapped into this idea that both parties are letting you down. You need politics that can get something done. Look what we've done in Detroit. Then there's something else interesting going on. All these Trump voters, my neighbors and friends in northern Michigan, these folks who first told me that they were so desperate they might vote for this clown on The Apprentice, they're starting to take a serious look at Duggan. And this isn't just anecdotal. There's polls to back this up. But anecdotally, what I'm hearing, Chuck, is these are folks who grew up in Detroit like I did, or whose parents grew up in Detroit.
And they moved up there. Yeah.
And they moved up there. Chuck, this is a literal fact. There is a retired Detroit firefighter or retired Detroit police officer in every county in the state of Michigan.
How about that? Interesting. So
there
there's a Detroit DNA in almost the same way New York City DNA infects the entire state of New York.
There was 2 million people. Yeah. There was 2 million people in the state in 1960, and now more than a third of them live north of Detroit. So they have an affinity for Detroit. There's a little, racial animus still in the north of 8 Mile stuff, but they have an affinity for Detroit. And here's this pudgy white guy from the suburbs who got elected when the Democratic machine was so opposed to him 10 years ago that they ran a candidate named Duggan against him on the Democratic primary. He had to run as a write-in candidate, Mike Duggan did.
In the primary to win. And he won as a write-in. People forget this. He won as a write-in. This is like, I don't write this guy's chances off as an independent. I'll voice some skepticism in here to push back at you in a minute. But you got to know Duggan's history to realize this guy's done the impossible before.
Well, and working with partnership with business leaders and nonprofits, he's done the impossible. He's helped bring Detroit back from bankruptcy. But as a politician, he's out of the Democratic machine, which is the irony here. Oh, and he's got a lot of baggage.
Yeah, his son ran Biden's Michigan campaign in 2020 and was in charge of Biden and Harris in 2024.
And he's no saint. There's a lot of skeletons in his closet that will come out. That the opposition research is going to be huge. But he's done some remarkable political things. And what he's done in Detroit isn't just a nostalgia thing playing with folks on the right, but it's also how many politicians do you know in this state, in this country, who've actually got something done? Who said, I'm going to get the garbage picked up sooner and the garbage gets picked up sooner? Who says, I'm going to have the ambulances arrive on time and they start arriving on time? Who says, I'm going to improve bus service and improve bus service? Is Detroit where it needs to be? No. Is he a perfect man? No. Are the rules rigged against an independent candidate? Hell yes. Yeah. But this guy could win it.
It's interesting that the impression I got last year being at Mackinac, and then a couple of times that I have visited places in Michigan that weren't Detroit, before I've had family in the southeastern part of the state for years. I used to go to Monroe, Michigan every summer for about 10 straight years. That's where my grandmother lived.
Well, if you know Monroe, you know the state. Yeah.
Yeah. And Monroe really is, Monroe shock absorbers and Lazy Boy. That was the heart and soul of the economy there. And what you've noticed over the last 30 years was animus towards Detroit by everybody else in Michigan. Oh, right. Yeah. There was an anti-Detroit vibe. Huge. And in fact, if you were a candidate for office, the Democratic Party was looking for candidates not from Detroit. And the Republican Party was running against Detroit to win statewide.
Yeah.
And it worked for some time. It was the counter. No different than you'd see candidates run against New York City. In my home state in Florida, candidates would run against Miami. You don't want whatever you're big. And something since Duggan, and it's like maybe a little bit of this is the Detroit Lions, and a little bit of this is, I got to give them a little credit too. But the positive vibe about the Detroit brand is and you have to go and visit Michigan and have been there when there was and understood the anti-Detroit vibe that used to. That's not how the place feels anymore.
It's like, well, first come here and see Detroit. It's remarkable.
No, it is. I was just there last week, and I love that they just put all the stadiums in the same place. That's what Philadelphia did, and it's such a good.
You can walk now. Look, it's 138 square miles. My old neighborhood is the third world. There's still some really durable poverty and illiteracy is still and hunger is still endemic, but it's been remarkable what the city's done. You mentioned the Lions. People forget the NFL draft was here last year. There was hundreds of thousands of people downtown, including a shitload, for example, of Green Bay Packers fans from the Upper Peninsula.
Right.
Okay. Folks who have not been in Detroit for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
And had a stereotype about it. Right.
Yeah, but two stereotypes. One is the racially tinged ruin porn, but the other is the Detroit they grew up on or their parents told them about. Mm-hmm. And it's that nostalgic Detroit now. It's that gritty Detroit. It's that we can do anything, including, by the way, maybe elect an independent governor. That we can do anything. We can go up from the bootstraps. That is the Detroit that maybe Mike Duggan can turn around that history you're talking about. There hasn't been a mayor from Detroit elected governor, over a century. But
this is a standard, and that's been standard big city politics. It's been Ed Rendell was the first Philly mayor to ever get elected statewide. No New York City mayor to this day has been able to become governor of New York. Yeah, so there is this sort of weird bias at times against the big, especially when you're when there's just one city that dominates. Right.
Versus, and it's usually racial. Certainly,
and it's certainly in the east of the Mississippi, it's almost always been black white.
But it is flipped. It could be an asset for Duggan.
Well, it's a sense that I get the sense people root for Detroit now. There was a sense of it wasn't oh, you did this to yourself. Who cares? Now it's no. Hey, they're actually doing the hard work. Let's help.
And the Trumpiest, most racially conflicted, anti-Detroit people I've known my whole life in the state are now saying, I want to give this Duggan guy a look. And I'm looking forward to going down to Detroit to see a ball game or go see a play So it's pretty remarkable how things have changed.
And yet I look at this governor's race and I think, boy, usually when there's an independent that has a chance, it's because one of the two parties has completely failed. In fairness to both parties here, I think, I'm going to, forget your own personal leanings. John James, Jocelyn Benson, Mike Duggan, those are three highly qualified candidates. Those are reasonably sort of what I would call conventionally qualified.
That may be their problem, though, Chuck.
Yes, I think that they're conventional. One is a congressman, one secretary of state. In some ways, almost two part of the system. Yeah,
and that's what he's playing against. Now, Benson's raising a lot of the money, not as much as Duggan. He's outraised everyone. She fits the Michigan. The conventional wisdom is Benson should be able to win because she's a woman in a state that Whitmer won. She's
not just Whitmer. This is a state that elects women quite a bit. Jennifer Granholm, Gretchen Witmer, Elissa Slotkin, Debbie Stabenow. This is not. There's no ceiling to break here, right? That ceiling got broken a long time ago in Michigan. Right. Yeah.
But both parties here are weak and ineffective and aren't getting anything done. So, she's got a good resume. James has got a good resume. He's got a reputation, though, for being someone who doesn't work hard. And this is a big state. It's hard to get around in. You got to work hard in the state. Yeah. Duggan works hard. I'd watch a guy named Tom Leonard, the former House Speaker, who just got in the race and is a hard worker and has got a profile. He's starting to get some attention from the Republican money. But you know where the Republican money is going in this race again?
To Duggan, right now.
Duggan
the non-MAGA money, right?
The traditional country club money, like the Gary Torgels of the world and
Well, it's really Dan
the Matt
Gilbert,
Collins
right?
of the world.
And
It's
Dan Gilbert.
Dan Gilbert, who's the big, people don't know, is the big mortgage guy here.
Rocket Mortgage. You may know Rocket Mortgage.
Right.
That's Dan Gilbert, right? Yeah.
It's that kind of that profile here that is sending money Duggan's way. But so Duggan is running against the duopoly. Duggan is running against politics as usual. It's a pretty effective message in an independent-minded state that is so desperate for change it voted twice for Trump. Can a conventional candidate win? Yes, but they could be defeated.
So,
and he's polling, by the way, in the polls, he's polling from the right and the left. Right now, the Democrats are going to have a hard time hanging the spoiler label around him. That could change. But right now, he's polling evenly from both sides.
Right. I've seen that. And it does feel as if, though, that his biggest problem is the further you get away from Detroit, the harder he's got to work in order to be considered on the same page. Like, because this is the tyranny of running as a third party candidate,
right,
which is eventually people's habits. Well, do we vote D or R, honey? Oh yeah, we're D voters.
And Jersey.
And you know, and
right,
they pull the lever. Governor's races are slightly different
right,
in that sense, but the major parties still have such a pull. I mean, I always go back. It was a great four-way. Remember when Kinky Friedman ran for governor in Texas?
Yeah,
but it wasn't just, you had Rick Perry, you had a former Republican running as an independent, Scott McClellan's mother, if you remember, to really put it. Yeah. And she was sort of getting all the Democratic money. She was the trial lawyer, ex-Republican, scooping up money. There was an underfunded former one-term member of Congress who got the Democratic nomination, who literally had no money. He finished second. Because there were so many people just used to going into the polls and pulling the D lever. He was outspent by both Kinky Friedman and the other candidate, I believe. And yet the power of being one of the two major brands was enough for second place. And so that's my sort of skepticism about Duggan. How does he overcome that aspect, which is not easy?
The only way, it's a very good point. The only way he could overcome it if this anecdotal, somewhat backed up by polls, is this analysis I'm giving you of the state being filled with people who have an affinity for Detroit and who hate politics. Hearing from a guy who is saying, I've done it before, I fixed things before. And they will hear from Mike Duggan. He will raise enough money to be heard, and he'll work his butt off to be heard. He'll travel to every Rotary club in the state.
I think he has to make the case that Gretchen Witmer was a failed governor. Now, maybe
he won't be afraid to make it. And
but what is the case? I mean, that's the thing. Is
we have
what makes her? I
got to be careful. I got to be careful here because I'm a supporter of hers, and I like her personally. But there's always a case to make against incumbents. First of all, in this day and age, we're the third highest unemployment rate in the state. She does have very high approval ratings, but I think in this environment, there's a bubble there that could hit, especially as she gets closer to being a lame duck. And there is, an emerging scandal kind of bubbling around out there. One of her biggest donors got a $20 million grant through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation with no strings attached, and now her fellow Democrat, another, to your point, female leader in the state, Dana Nessel, the head of the Attorney General's office, is running an embezzlement investigation into the administration. She subpoenaed and they raided one of Governor Whitmer's agencies. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention from the Detroit Free Press. The Detroit News is all over it.
Right.
And if the Whitmer folks are not in front of the story, if they're not careful, it could become a national story, and it could be an anvil. So you can't just assume that, just like I'm not assuming Duggan's going to win. Right. You can't assume that Duggan won't have the ability, and for that matter, Benson won't have that ability or even the need. Benson being the Democrat, one of the Democratic leaders, that they won't be able to and even need to post off of Whitmer.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're Jocelyn Benson, I think it's tough to run against Whitmer.
Right now it is, Chuck, but it might not be a year from now.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, we got to look around the corner of these things, and where is Whitmer going to be 6 months from now? And again, in a climate where one thing that unites voters is they're tired of the status quo, I just don't think it's going to work to say I'm going to do it like she did. She's going to have to separate herself somehow from Governor Whitmer. To me, the question is, how much is she going to need to? Is it just, hey, I'm my own person, or is it I will do things radically different from her? Time's going to tell.
So let me give you a lefty argument that I've heard against Whitmer, that by extension would go against the current speaker that I guess is thinking about jumping into the Senate race, I think, or which is simply, if you compare Whitmer to Walz, right? Both got both had unified control of their legislatures. Here's what Walz did. And it was sort of a progressive wish, he checked off a lot of progressive wish lists. Whitmer did not. Now, I know the argument I'd be making if I were in Whitmer's shoes is, hey, we're a moderate state. We're not, we weren't elected to do this lefty wish list. We were elected to do this. But
I did take the lead on abortion.
Right.
Whitmer can say,
But the argument I've heard that the left might make is too cautious. Didn't sort of, she had power. If you're not going to use power when you get it, what's the point of having it?
Ooh, you know what? You just sound like Mike Duggan.
Yeah, that seems to be the lefty argument against Whitmer.
That is an argument that could be made against Whitmer, and it could stick. It's the kind of argument you could hear Mike Duggan doing. It's certainly the argument you could hear from the right. If I'm Benson, if I'm Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, who's also in that Democratic primary,
right?
I'm looking to make that argument, partly just by default. That again, you've got to run against the status quo in American politics. Yeah. But number two, I do think there is some air in her approval ratings that might be seeping out here the next few months.
Yeah. Look, I mean, boy, Whitmer's just had a tough 6 months, hasn't she? I mean, when you look at the Trump where to me, the photo that will, sometimes, there are certain images and moments that you realize, oh my God, that's going to stick with you forever.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, right? In fact, I think there's a new one with Trump, the dropped golf ball, right? What else do you need to explain Donald Trump's presidency? Right. And the idea, just that. That's it.
A lackey cheating for him.
Yeah, it's a million words. Right. Not 1,000 words. That's a million words.
Right.
Her hiding behind the folder.
Yeah.
Like, it is just you're like, boy, if that doesn't scream, you're not in command. You're afraid to lead, right? It's like, it's one of those, I don't know how you explain it away.
Yeah. On the policy side, you got to give her credit for recognizing that her job was to be governor, not to be running for president.
What's the promise she made voters? She made voters that, hey, I'll work with whoever's president to help Michigan. That's right.
She got us a new air wing from Trump at the Selfridge Air Force Base here in Macomb County. She got some slicing off of the tariffs for the auto industry. But politics is perception, and it says everything you're saying plus something else. The first test I think a presidential candidate has to pass, and I saw Bill Clinton pass this. Even before his big DLC speech in Cleveland in 91, it's having the right people around you, recognizing that the people who made you governor aren't going to make you president. Governor Whitmer, I love the people around her. They're good people. They're good public servants, but she never should have been in that room. And then when she walked in that room, or when they were walking into the room and realized it was a news conference, somebody should have thrown their body in front of her. And then she walked out of the room and came back in. That's political malpractice times 2. Could you imagine Bill Clinton walking into that ambush without a plan? And if he found himself in that ambush, would he not have found himself a way out of it? Or an Ann Richards? This isn't a gender thing; it's a political athlete thing. But hiding behind a folder is
It's Dukakis in the tank. I'm sorry. It's the same.
That's what it is. Right,
it's
right.
Dukakis in the tank. You're
Now,
just
here's
like,
the thing
oh,
about
God.
Governor Whitmer. I've always
Right.
wondered if Governor Whitmer really wants to become president. She really does love the state. She loves the job she has. She might have her eye on something else. I'm not convinced that she's going to run the next cycle. If she really wanted to be president, she should have stepped up early in the 2024 cycle and primaried Biden. And you know what? I think she'd be president now.
Yeah, no, I had the exact conversation I've had this conversation with Gavin Newsom. I said, in fact, I thought the only way he could ever become president is to actually, you're not going to win an open race for the presidency as the former mayor of San Francisco, but you might as the dragon slayer, right? In a primary, right? That might be your only path to it.
And without naming names, she was urged privately by people who admire her and who could see that Biden should not run. She was begged to get in it and told, this is your window. And I think she decided not just that this isn't my window, but maybe this isn't a job I want. She didn't tell me that. Her people haven't told me that. I'm just reading between the lines here.
Well, I could tell you this. The only person to get elected president being risk averse was Joe Biden. And in my lifetime, every other elected president took a real risk that in some form or another, that conventional consultants would have said, don't do it, right? Obama was told not to run. I always thought Hillary Clinton was too risk averse. In fact,
that's why she lost.
She'd have been president if she'd run in 2004, but she didn't have the guts to do it then.
Right.
I understand, but that was probably her window.
That was her.
Obama knew if he waited, he probably never gets elected. And Bill Clinton, everybody said, don't run against this guy Bush. And Bill did. I want to go to Bill Clinton here a minute because you were there the last time the Democrats had a real fight about its direction.
Yeah.
And a question that haunts me is, I don't know if the Democrats have lost enough to know what they to me, when you lose as close as they lost, there's too many. It's too easy to tactically talk yourself into, well, if we just do this, or this, the shellacking of Dukakis in 88 gave breathing room for Bill Clinton to make a counter argument, an argument that the DLC was trying to make before 88, was making progress, but not quite getting there, and then really made progress after the shellacking. I wonder if Democrats have lost enough to have the conversation they need to have.
No, they haven't. They should have. I mean, losing once to Donald Trump should have been enough. They lost to a clown, a guy.
Well, they convinced themselves that it was the referees, essentially. It was the referees' fault, right? It's a classic case of blaming. Trust me, Ohio State stole a national title from the University of Miami. It was the refs' fault, Exactly. But you know what the dirty little secret was to that game? Miami played like shit the entire game. The Ohio State never should have had a chance to be in the game. Is that Miami's fault? Is it the refs' fault? Right? And Hillary Clinton ran a shitty campaign, and she shouldn't have been close enough where the refs could make a difference.
The Democrats have been running a shitty campaign, playing a shitty game for 25 years, Chuck.
Well, I'd say Obama played.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
ran two really good national. Yeah.
Boy, my God.
But 08 and 12 are the outlier. Well, I'd actually say 06, 08, and 12 are the three best years for the Democrats. And they were mission, you could see it, right? They had a mission, and they were running as different types of Democrats. They haven't done that since.
The other big thing that's changed since Clinton's time was back then, Democrats had to hear from people who told them, you suck. Now they don't. Now they're able to walk around in their intellectual bubbles and tell each other we only lost by little much, and it's the referee's fault.
Oh, if Kamala Harris just had 90 more days.
Right. Really? Where now you don't have to hear the truth if you're on the left or the right. And as far as Biden goes, he's the first risk averse to win in our lifetime, but he really didn't win that election.
I know.
Trump lost it. It was
of course
he was given that by default. Yeah. My big fear writ large in politics is not just that Democrats or Republicans aren't going to learn their lesson because they're always winning or losing by a little bit. It's we're always going to have these swing elections that really don't swing that much, right, Chuck? It's either side wins or loses by a few seats, wins or loses by a few percentage points. We're not going to have the kind of top to bottom institutional reform, huge reform movement like we had 100 years ago in this country, unless one of these parties builds a super majority, and then does something with it. So builds a supermajority like Obama did in 2008, but then get in office and use that movement to force change on the political system, which Barack Obama did not. I'm afraid we have a duopoly that is very satisfied by just winning or losing by a little bit and being up against an opponent who is bad enough to beat. And we're not going to have the kind of cataclysm in politics we do, not just to wake up one party that they need to do better, but for us as people to realize we deserve better and we have to demand better. And we need to reform the political systems, the structures, the institutions to change politics and make this country survive another couple hundred years.
Anybody out there, when I talk to, what's interesting right now, for what it's worth, is anytime I interview somebody running for governor, and it hasn't mattered whether it was Jocelyn Benson in a Politics and Bros event, or it has been Rob Sand in Iowa, or it's been David Jolly in Florida, I'll ask them, who are some model governors? And the first name out of their mouth is Andy Beshear, and the second name out of their mouth is Josh Shapiro. And then after that, it's a grab bag. But the two governors I hear the most about are Beshear and Shapiro. Do you see Bill Clinton in any one of them?
No, I'm a little bit biased because, I watched Clinton up close.
You did. I mean, you were there. You were the Little Rock bureau chief, which really, I mean, you were on Clinton starting, 86? Was it 86, 87?
Yeah. And he was an incredibly accessible governor. So I literally followed him around the Capitol, getting a PhD in politics.
And Hillary Clinton, too. You had an incredible relationship with her for a while.
I did. I had a great working relationship with both of them. But no, I just don't see. Look, I understand what the appeal people see in both of them. They're very, very good communicators. They've got a lot done in their states, but I just don't see them as transformational. I just don't see them as quite the political athlete that Bill Clinton was, who really loved policy and was great at politics and lived at the intersection. There's a Senate candidate here. We haven't moved to the Senate yet, here in Michigan. Yeah. I'll put on your radar. Everybody's talking about McMorrow, who's my state senator, and a talented politician and someone who really understands modern storytelling. And everybody is familiar with Haley Stevens, who's the darling of the DSCC, of Schumer and the political class.
Could be a kiss of death if she's not careful.
Yeah, and yes. But there's a third candidate there that I recommend you take a look at, Abdul El-Sayed. Who's a medical degree from Columbia, a PhD from Oxford. He ran for governor in the Democratic primary in Whitmer's first race and was beat by her, but learned his lessons. Hugely ambitious, but the kind of ambition where he's trying to figure out why he lost and what he needs to do to do better. Great communicator, young, understands social media. He is a policy wonk. He's a doctor. He's a scientist.
So he reads a lot.
Reads a lot, thinks a lot, and knows how to talk like a good doctor does. He's got good bedside manner, I'd say. And that could be interesting if Mallory McMorrow doesn't emerge as the opponent to Haley Stevens, the congresswoman who's the conventional favorite. It'd be a fascinating race between Abdul El-Sayed and Stevens, because you would have
now Abdul El-Sayed has Bernie Sanders support already, right?
Yes, sir. So you would have you would have Bernie versus Biden, basically. Bernie versus Schumer.
Yeah.
You would have left versus center versus left. You would have Israel versus Palestine. You would have Abdul El-Sayed, who's a very strong supporter of the Palestinian movement, and Stevens, who's very proud and strong supporter of Israel. You're talking about Michigan being a template for what's happening in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. That could be a heck of a face-off.
So where does McMorrow fit into this? And do you sense that she's like, I sense she's got the outsider lane without being tagged as a progressive. Maybe I don't know if that's a positive or a negative.
Yeah, I'm conflicted about her. Personally, I really like her. She's a neighbor. I just saw her the other day in the library with her kids. I mean, she's a great politician and a great storyteller. And I mean that in an authentic way. She's a really good communicator. But she just, and she's raised quite a bit of money. But there's just something about it that really hasn't broken through. And I, to be honest with you, I think it's a bias. I don't want you talking about what I don't want to miss. I don't want to miss Syed. So a lot of people have written him off, and I'm keeping my eye on him. So maybe I'm just not, I'm balancing it out by not falling in love with her candidacy. There's three really good candidates on the Democratic side. One of them is going to emerge to run against Mike Rogers, who's almost for sure going to win the Republican nomination. Yeah. If it's Stevens, it's going to be a repeat of the Slotkins-Rogers race that Slotkin barely won.
It's almost
and Slotkin's a better politician than Stevens, which is not fair to Stevens because Slotkin is an A-plus politician. And if it's Syed, then you've got Bernie versus MAGA. You've got young versus old. Boomer versus millennial. He could win that race.
It is interesting to me that the Republican Party is not behaving as a divided party, right? As it has in the recent past in Michigan. Right. Both James and Rogers looks like they're going to be essentially avoid the uncomfortable primary that is dogged so many Republicans. Are you convinced of that?
No, Rogers, I think so, but James could face a tough race from Leonard. Watch Tom Leonard.
You do think that? You don't?
Yeah,
it is.
I do.
Would he hit him from the left or the right? Would he hit him from the business community or from the MAGA right?
From the business community, which you could write that off. But look, James is not a hard worker. James has a reputation for being an empty suit. James
he's an on paper candidate. I know a lot of those. They look great on paper. Yeah,
he's an on paper candidate, and Leonard is an on the ground candidate. Just don't write him off.
Sounds like you think if one you wake up, you go into a coma, you wake up day after the election day, I tell you one Republican won the statewide, you would assume it's Rogers, not James.
If you told me one to be Rogers, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Why did he lose the last time?
He ran against a generational candidate. Slotkin is really good. Slotkin's really good. Slotkin's positioning to run for president now, I'm convinced.
You are? Sooner than we think? You think if Whitmer doesn't, I mean, everybody does feel like there's some deference to Whitmer, at least for now. Obviously, barring, things can change quickly in politics, but
she should be a lame duck in a year.
Yeah. Does she show deference to Whitmer for 28? Or do you think Slotkin is that interested or in a hurry?
For one, as I already suggested, I don't think Whitmer runs in 28. I think Whitmer missed her window. I'm not convinced Whitmer wants to be president. Whitmer is going to be another former governor in 2028. I like Whitmer. I think she's been a good governor. No, if I had to pick one Democrat who's going to run for president in 28, it'd be Slotkin. Again, you talk about windows.
Interesting.
Slotkin doesn't mind taking risk. She took risk her whole career. She was a intelligence officer. She's trying to figure out the third way for the Democratic Party, and she's young, she's ambitious, she's smart. I could see her running for the White House.
One of the things
by the way, I'm just making this up. No, her people haven't told me this. I don't know. I don't know.
I got you.
I'm not a reporter anymore. But
you're just one of the. You did your 10,000 hours. I think you're an expert.
That's my Gladwell moment.
Right. I guess the question I would have is on Duggan. If he wins, when you win a swing state like Michigan, immediately, right? Whoever the governor is, right? If John James is governor, he's the number one draft pick on running mate list, right? For the Republicans, right? Vance James. Oh my God, you got to pick him, right? We know that 100%. If Duggan wins, now I'm torn on this. I think we live in an environment where when you and I were first covering politics, the idea of running in the midterm and then winning and immediately turning around and running for president would be punished by the electorate. But I do think this is an electorate so desperate for new and different that if new and different it wins in a place like Michigan, that suddenly there's a whole bunch of people going, I've always wondered if we could have an alternative to the duopoly. Why not him? Now to me, you got to do something before you become the why not him. Do you sense that kind of ambition in Duggan or not?
He's a very ambitious man. He wouldn't have got where he is if he wasn't ambitious. I don't know if he has his sights on the White House, but I'm smiling, Chuck, because my last job in journalism was at Crane's Detroit Business. I was publisher of that publication. And in 2018, I think, I wrote a column that he should run for president. Because of what I'm saying about him now, but more importantly, what I'm saying about the electorate now in our state of politics. And listen, let's put everything together we've been saying. You need to know what your window is. You got to take risks if you want to be president.
100%.
Mr. Duggan, why wait? People are desperate for change. They're so desperate, they do desperate things. If an electorate is capable of electing Donald Trump, are they capable of electing a former Democratic mayor of Detroit who's not independent? Sure. I mean, don't rule anything out. Right. Is Duggan ambitious enough to make a run for it? I guarantee he's not thinking about it now. He wants to be governor. But if he saw a window and he knows there's a need, I wouldn't rule it out. But it's a great question. I haven't thought of it, but I sure as hell wouldn't rule it out.
Well, that's it is so obvious to me that we need sort of a restructuring, and we know the only thing the two parties agree on is preventing a third party from getting traction. It's about it these days.
And a fourth party and a fifth party. Yeah. They don't want to open up politics. Communications have been democratized, but politics has not been.
And if you look, it seems to me we've been living in an era where there's this small group of voters who totally are dissatisfied. And they just keep voting.
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop right there.
Voting away. Yeah.
There's a huge percentage of voters who are dissatisfied. Many of them put on their blue and red jersey. But Chuck, there's a huge appetite out there. There's 80% of the public who's dissatisfied with politics it is today. Yeah. Just because 60% or 65% of that 80 puts on a red or blue jersey doesn't mean that a new form of politics couldn't drag them into a new form of politics.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
it's not
no.
a small group of people who are dissatisfied.
Well, it's a small group that have been willing to keep going back and forth. Right. Who say, well, vote them out. Now I'm going to vote them out. And none of them. And it's like, why do both Biden and Trump immediately are basically 45% or under before the end of their first 6 months? It's because they were like, well, I didn't vote for that. I just didn't want that, So,
that's American politics going back to 1776 and 1865 and 1932 and 1968 and 1991. Nothing changes in politics until it frickin' does. Okay, I can't look around the corner and tell you what it's going to be. I can't. I can't predict exactly. I'm not even sure it's going to happen, but I know this. It needs to happen. We need drastic change. It can happen. I don't know what it is. But we got to stop defending the status quo. And I know you don't do this. I just love what you write on Substack, because you're one of the few people who's been around a long time, Chuck, who doesn't wave the white flag of surrender and say change can't happen.
No, I mean,
happen.
It's the only. It is. It's it's just like bankruptcy. First it happens slowly, then it happens quickly. There you go. Is. It's going to come. Let's talk about media leadership. You and I both have been in leadership positions at traditional media companies. You at the Associated Press, National Journal, and the Atlantic. Myself at NBC, also at National Journal for a stint. And I'll be honest, I always felt like I had bosses who did have my back for the most part. Okay, Andy Lack, Deborah Turness, Steve Kappas. These were the three news presidents that I was spent a majority of my time with, and they ultimately, I always thought, if shit hit the fan, they were going to defend my reporting first. I am stunned. I know this. You could be shocked but not surprised, or is it surprised and not shocked? I don't know. Whatever version you want to use. To that, there's been first. It was when the Associated Press was kicked out for obvious First Amendment reasons. Nobody defended them. When I see what Brendan Carr, who literally is violating the First Amendment in what they're doing with CBS, and no network president or no owner of a media consortium that has a news division is saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't, this is not what the relationship is supposed to be, that it's just cowering. I don't think they fully realize what they've done to their own journalists. I mean, I don't
think they care.
Yeah.
I don't think they care. Look, our career, Chuck, spans a huge divide. The first half of our career roughly was pre-internet, and the second half was post-internet.
Right.
The first half was a business model
of gatekeepers, and that was, but it
was a business model that made in newspapers 30% profit, in TV probably more, based on the idea that you built as an objective of a newsroom as you could, that spoke truth to power, you could create a big audience and put a Montgomery ad, or in your case, TV, a car dealership ad, and print money. What happened in the early to mid aughts, is that business model was destroyed by the internet, and newspaper publishers and TV broadcasters, the people who owned, first, a lot of them went out of business, and then those who were left consolidated, corporatized, and now are focused like a laser beam on the bottom line, because that's what they have to do. There was a business incentive to let Walter Cronkite be Walter Cronkite. That's why they left him alone, because they were making a shitload of money.
They didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. They did it because it was, at the time, it made sense.
So the real problem here is the business model. Again, it's a we the people problem. The real problem here is Americans, now that we have access to communications, now that we're all publishers, now that we all there aren't gatekeepers. The gatekeepers have been destroyed. We only want to hear information that confirms our biases. We don't pay for news largely, and so the C-suite is left at its own devices. So I'm shocked and not surprised that after a career where, like you, the AP always stood behind our reporting. David Bradley, our former mutual boss at the Atlantic, always stood by our reporting. My owner here in Detroit, Casey Crane, stood behind my reporting. But you could see this happening, that soon somebody came in who was willing to defy norms and hold institutions hostage, extort them, that the C-suites would collapse as quickly as the college presidencies are collapsing, and many other institutions. It's sad, it's depressing, it's horrifying, actually, because it could be the end of the First Amendment, unless another business model, and here I would love to talk to you about what you're working on, unless another business model comes up, and I think it will, where we can find a way to make money again on journalism that speaks truth to power, that punches a president in the face, that punches a city council person in the face, that punches a police chief in the face. What it's really going to take, though, is an American public that's willing to read news and opinions that challenge their biases. And that's my big concern, is, will those days ever come back again?
Yeah, I mean, the Pollyannish view I have is that if you can meet people where they are, if you can get them to trust you on stuff that's important to them in their lives, if you're the place they will get to watch their kid play sports, if you're a place that is where you find photos of your nieces and nephews at a band concert, then over time, and if you're also the place that helps them live their lives, helps them save money on groceries, helps them find a cheaper place to take their grandkids out to dinner, and you become which is what the old, my whole obsession is, the newspaper bundle was brilliant. By the way, only 20% of people read the news at that time too. It was, there was this incredible bundle. And I think more news publishers have to think, look, if you want truth to power to be even read or believed, you actually have to be a service journalist 90% of the time. 90% of the time, you've got to treat the readers like customers. You got to help them navigate government, help them figure out if they need an umbrella, help them figure out if they should take public transportation today or Uber instead of driving today. You got to help them live their lives, give them a way, make their life easier. And then if they trust you to help them live their life, then that's how you build trust. Like, okay, now I got to tell you about this. This really popular person that you really like, he's a crook.
Right. And let me explain to you in terms that you understand, that don't insult you, that don't call you stupid.
Don't talk down to them either. Right.
100%. Yes. You're onto something, Chuck, because what's the other trend line that tracked the destruction of the business model and tracks the destruction of people's trust and participation in politics? Yeah. It's their lack of trust in all institutions. Since the 1970s, Nothing We Trust, the piece that you remember me writing years ago, that showed that all of our institutions were losing trust in them. Well, the media is one of them. And if you could find a way where people trust the news organization, and it's a news organization that is relevant to them in a way that news organizations stopped becoming relevant years ago. I remember the Detroit Free Press when I was growing up. The left-hand side of the page, the bottom column had a hardline phone on it, a rotary phone at the top. You could call a number with a problem, and they would solve it and show transparently how they solved it every day. I mean, it was service journalism on the top.
You ever know the Bob Schieffer origin story? One of Bob Schieffer's, his big break was a woman named Marina Oswald needed a ride from Fort Worth to Dallas, and she didn't know who else to call, so she called up the newspaper, and Bob answered the phone. Oh, you need a ride? I'll give you a ride, right? Of course,
I've heard that story, but I never connected to what you're talking about. It's because she saw the newspaper as a place to get a ride.
Yes.
Help.
And back in 1963, that is what you did. That was not a crazy thing to think. Today, you wouldn't do it.
But you went to Dun in 2005, for that matter. Yeah, you went to Dun it. Most of our careers, actually, went to Dun it because that ethic kind of was lost even before we got into the business. Holy shit!
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
It is one of those.
So can we build? Can you build something like that?
Look. That's my hope that it's scalable. Because here's the other belief I have. I don't think the AP or NBC ever had natural trust with its audience.
No,
what gave NBC its audience is the local anchor in the WDIV in Detroit. What gave you trust was the Detroit Free Press and the AP, and then them running your AP or the Grand Rapids Journal, or and when we got rid of, I always said it's like a foundation of a house. There's always a pillar that's doing more work than you realize. When you're like, some pillars are doing.
Great analogy, yeah.
And local news they were the trust. We weren't. Right. We're too distant.
I did something on Substack the other day with the new numbers that came out that showed how local journalism has really been decimated. And I did some thinking about it as I'm writing it. And I meant this, it looked probably falsely humble, but I know that my most important work was at the Hot Springs Sentinel Record. Yeah. And to a lesser extent, the Arkansas Democrat than it was when I went to Washington, because I was doing the kind of work you were talking about. I was writing about things that mattered to people, and I would walk out in the street, walk to church, walk to a restaurant, walk to the ball field, and I'd be talking to my readers. And you're right, with that pillar gone, no wonder we've lost the trust. So if you could rebuild it, what better way than through sports?
Let me throw one more at you. This is Richard Gingras over at the Google, who used to run the Google News Initiative. He made this case, and I think it's a pretty good one. He said the worst thing that happened to journalism was all the president's men.
Oh, man, I know you're going with this. Finish your thought, though. Yeah, but he's right.
Right, which is, it made every journalist think that unless you're getting a scalp, you're not doing your job, when actually 90% of journalists are public servants.
Yeah.
And when you lose the public service, you are there to serve the public. Sometimes that's accountability, and you do get a scalp. Pardon I know that I apologize for those. I didn't mean it in those terms. Right. You do get a notch on your belt. Look what I did. I held truth to power. But
notch on your belt isn't good either, by the way.
Yeah, all right. That's I'm too old. This is what happens. We're too old to do metaphors anymore that work.
You're right.
But
look how I describe journalism myself. Just now, I was preaching about punching leaders in the mouth.
But we need that. Don't get me wrong. But right now,
but it's not the central job. It's not. You're right. It's not the central job.
And I think that's the disconnect, right? And in fact, I look at the current.
I've never thought of that, Chuck.
I look at all the current local news startups, and I love them. I think 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's figure it out. Everybody has a business model. Let's see which ones work. My concern has been there's been too much journalism for journalists. And not enough journalism for everybody else.
Yeah, I know. I wrote for editors my whole career. Man, you're onto something. I wasn't as much as I want to be the Woodward and Bernstein guy, but I was, standing on that front row of the White House.
I felt the same way. I wasn't interested in I wasn't thinking about how am I helping somebody live their life. I was thinking about how am I going to catch these guys in a bullshit moment like today.
And I want to get my lead on the wire in the next 30 seconds. But I mean, if you could bring it back to the foundations where we're helping people, especially at a time when you go back to, you need to understand people to understand politics. Well, maybe we need to understand people to understand the media. At a time when people are looking for someone to navigate through their lives and they're not being helped by anyone else. This is the nation adrift. If there could be media organizations that their sole purpose was to help you figure out where to shop, how to shop, get your lawn cut, what schools to pick, how to advocate for your kids, how to watch your kids' baseball games.
By the way, this
You're
is
onto
everything
something,
this is everything the old newspaper did do. That's the thing. This isn't a new idea. It's just looking.
It's an idea that's been lost, though.
Yes, and it's sort of unlocking in it. But you do need to, it's funny. You have a lot of the people that want to fund these efforts, and they're looking for, we need better accountability journalism. Yeah. Well, guess what? We have too many journalists in Washington and not enough everywhere else.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So, how you feeling about your Detroit Lions? For
the first time in my life, I'm bullish, because even if they don't go to the Super Bowl, even if they have a bad year,
you feel like they're going to be competitive. Yeah, right.
For the first time in my life, they have a great leader in Sheila Hampford, who picked two.
Boy, I'm impressed with her. She's finally the third. What does it take? The third or fourth generation to get a good leader? Sometimes you don't know.
She did what the boys in her family couldn't do. There needs to be a book on leadership written about Sheila Hampford, who's not getting enough credit. She decided to start with the culture first, and she picked two men who she thought were culture driven, and said, "You two guys are going to get along." And when they got off to a bad start, she stood behind them, like David Bradley did for us. Good leaders do. And we have a great GM and a great coach. It's a great culture in the locker room. The city is crazy about them. It's just amazing. And now, we have 3.5 decent teams in Detroit. So it's kind of
it is something. Cool. The half, is that the Red Wings? Is that what you're referring to as the half?
The Wings. And even that, I clutched when I said it, because they're led by Steve Yzerman, who is second only to Gordie Howe in the Gods of Detroit. but they've had a hard time getting back in the playoffs. But the Pistons had a great year.
And Tigers, they feel like they're in the right trajectory, right? Like the Pistons are headed. You could feel it. They're coming. Maybe it's not this year.
Even the Wings, I think, are too. The Wings just they're young, and but like you say, you go downtown Detroit and you can throw a baseball and hit all 4 or all 3 stadiums. The Wings and the Pistons play in the same, and they're all beautiful stadiums in a beautiful downtown in a great city. So
look, I've watched Washington D.C. transformed its waterfront.
Yeah,
and this is what. Here's the thing, it's funny. I'm talking about leaning on sports to sort of fix local news. Sports can really dramatically change the identity of a city.
Yeah, it really can.
And really can give you a new identity.
And the mood of a city too. I mean, I've never seen, you're a big college football fan and I'm not. Yeah. So the closest analogy would be, U of M when they were hot, but I've just never seen the city so excited in the fall. All week long, we're all wearing our Honolulu and white and talking about the Lions and proud of the team. And it affects the mindset of the city as much as it affects the image of the city.
No, it's there was a time I thought, boy, is Detroit going to be able to support 4 major league franchises? Is it a big enough market anymore? And I think we're getting the answer to that question.
Hell yes, it's a big metropolitan area, and the stadiums fill up with people from 60 miles around. That's the key.
I just realized something, and I'm going to make this. So I'm going to get real. One more political question. We didn't mention labor unions once.
Well, that tells you something about labor unions, doesn't it?
What is that? I was just going to say, and if I'd asked you which labor union could make a difference politically in the state, which one would you say it is? Teamsters, UAW, who?
Both of those could make a difference on the margins, but neither one is nearly the force that it was. You can win in the state without either one of their endorsements.
And in fact, is the teachers union as powerful these days as the UAW?
Definitely. And the UAW, as you know, went through the huge scandal, and they have a new leader who's now being investigated by the court. There's questions of corruption around him. It's one of the things that bothers me the most. Because I came out of a union household. Most of my family still works in the factories. The unions are still important to people's lives. It's an institution that has let people down because they've been weakened, not just by politics and not just by Reagan and not just by conservative. They've been weakened from within. They have forgotten who they serve, and I'm overgeneralizing here. They're kind of like journalists who think that they're writing for each other instead of serving their constituents, and it hurts at a time when my brother working at the Warren stamping plant could really use somebody fighting for him. The UAW.
Yeah, no, I mean, you look around. I've always said, I always have been going hot and cold on unions. I'm like, if we didn't have them, I'd want them. But, and the threat of them does keep corporate America from totally abusing its workforce. It's sort of like they're a necessity, but boy, I wish they were more effective.
Well, okay, yeah, and political organizations are a necessity, and I wish they were more effective. Religious organizations are a necessity. Yeah. I wish they were effective. Groups like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are important, but I wish they were more effective. That's our problem. Our institutions are really freaking important, and I wish they were more effective.
I'm enjoying your Substack. You like writing again, don't you?
I do. I stopped writing for several years, and I needed it for political therapy. And
boy, it's
how much I love it.
I'm sure. Like, did you?
I love
yours. It's almost like riding. While it's like riding a bike. I'm sore the first time I ride a bike after a while. Like it, yeah. I mentally, man. I'm getting back in the weekly habit, but man, I'll admit, it is like, whew, and it used to be so easy.
Yeah, maybe because I've been writing for my clients for the last 8 years, so I didn't have a problem with the writing, and I thought I'd have a problem. Coming up with a sharp opinion and have something to say, but that hasn't been a problem. Your Substack, though, pisses me off, to be honest with you, Chuck. Because every time I read it, I say, shit, I should have read that. I should have written that. God, I can't do that better than
well,
that.
That's all right. If I'm writing for journalists, then I'm happy right now.
You really do channel me, and you really do channel this ethos.
Well, maybe we're the group think. That's the problem. Or maybe we were the out of the cool kids group think, and maybe we were onto something. Who knows?
There's not enough people who write and think like you do. I appreciate it. I love your stuff.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. All right, brother. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, other thing people don't know about you, you're a hell of a writer.
Michigan, thank you for saying that. I think, there's only one state to visit for the next 15 months. Is I think it's as diverse, and there's a million stories to write.
And your viewers should look me up. I'll take them for a beer. It is the place to come to cover American politics.
I agree. Thanks, Ron. Good to see you.
Take care, buddy. Good to see you, pal.